The social web can do more good in the world than it can do bad. You can be sitting at your house in your pajamas, and you can actually impact the lives of someone sitting in a country hundreds of thousands of miles away that is wrought with political strife. You can say, I'm here, I'm listening to you.
In the 20th century, if you had something to say in public, you couldn't, period. Right? If you were a civilian, if you were a citizen but not a media professional, you could not broadcast a message, no matter how hard you tried. In fact, people who went out of their way to try to get messages out in public through amateur channels, right, holding up signs on the street or, by the roadside, were widely regarded as being kind of off their rockers. And that change is enormous, that anyone who wants to participate, has at least the means to participate, is a huge change.
Now with the internet, people have access to create and distribute on their own. People can share their own thoughts and feelings, experiences, talents. When you take this model and you empower the rest of the world with the opportunity to create their content, of course, you're going to have a lot of stuff that potentially is being produced that isn't meaningful to anyone in particular. But again, you're going to have a small amount of the content or individuals having opportunity to rise to the top. So time just have inspirational stories. You have political candidates leveraging the system. You have, people just capturing moments, be it, a local event happening within their town, or, protests, or what's happened in Iran. People capturing these moments and having now a chance to share them with the world, and people using it as a resource to be informed. And
the web's democratic in one way and distinctly undemocratic in another way, and I think a lot of the confusion about the political ramifications have to do with that one word having so many meanings. So it's democratic in that it quite literally delivers power to the people. It essentially opens up participation in the public sphere. So in that sense of the word democratic, the web has been this huge increase in the participatory logic of the media environment. If by democracy, though, you don't just mean engagement and participation and availability to be part of the public sphere, but you mean the contending of political ideas in such a way that an outcome is reached and it balances the rights of the minority with the rights of the majority, the web is not democratic at all.
There's been a debate, not just since the history of the internet, but really since the history of the computer age, is how would computers develop? Would they empower individuals, or would they empower the state? And so if you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, you have sort of the classic science fiction narratives where you have like a supercomputer that's running a planet. I believe there's a Star Trek episode from the original Star Trek where you have the planet Beta, where you have these docile citizens that are controlled by a single computer that's sort of incarnates the thoughts of somebody who lived 8,000 years ago, and he still sort of runs the planet. And that was sort of this vision of the computer revolution as leading towards centralization of power. But then I think starting in the late 70s into the 80s, this very alternative vision of the computer revolution developed, which was, I think, started with the personal computers, that computers would be a vehicle not for empowering the state, but for empowering individuals and giving them more information and more knowledge about what happened. And in some ways, the internet revolution of the late 90s and 2000s, I think, was sort of a culmination of this sort of revolution in information technology where information just became too much for the state to handle, and you had to decentralize power. And this is in some ways, there's a version of this which was the story of the fall of Eastern Europe and of communism, where basically things like the spread of fax machines enabled people to find out what was happening and to circumvent the official truths promulgated by institutions like Pravda in the Soviet Union, and at that point it gradually unraveled when people learned what was really going on. And I think in some ways the internet was just a culmination of that process. That being said, I think the jury is still out, and the question of where it will be in 20 or 30 years, one should not be overly dogmatic. I think it may empower individuals. It's possible that we go back to a 1960s version where it somehow ends up empowering the state. But I think the question will be decided by technology and not by politics. It's likely we either have a far more powerful state that uses technology to control things, which is in some sense a culmination of what's happening in China to some extent, or we have a place where the technology sort of circumvents existing power structures, which I think has been happening in Western Europe and the United States.
The Chinese authority censors content for mainly political reasons, but also to maintain its control over the people. It maintains censorship over all media capable of reaching a wide audience. This includes television, print media, radio, film, theater, text messaging, video games, literature, and the internet. But censorship on the internet is not completely successful.
Because China has never had an independent media and the free public space all the time under the Chinese Communist Party's rule, internet is a first time that as an alternative of the public media space ever since 1949. Again, Chinese internet is not a real free space. It's still heavily policed. However, it's much freer than what you can say and what you can hear on the official media. And especially when there are millions of internet users who can express themselves with a very low threshold. Anyone can have the internet connection and then can publicize something, and then easy to be copied and pasted and circulated through these robust networks, very redundant network structure. It is extremely hard for the authority to completely, absolutely control any type of information. So in that background, the rise of the Chinese public opinion only sort of emerges as a real power in the last few years when the Chinese internet users base getting large enough.
The situation after the earthquake in 2008 in China is a great example of how the use of the internet was able to beat censorship. Around 80,000 people died because of the earthquake, many of which were young school children. While good constructed government buildings held up fine, public schools were completely destroyed, killing thousands of children. Chinese authority issued a censorship order that no Chinese media could cover this story. Many bloggers rose up to bring light to this situation.
There's one Chinese artist, Ai Weiwei, who is also a very known blogger. He bravely started a project of compiling all the names of the dead children of the school clubs. And that action alone generated a national sort of attention on this issue, even defying all the censorship that taking down some of the blogs, closing down his writings. However, there is hundreds and thousands of other volunteers are keep on putting those information online, eventually driving this agenda back to the national media. So this is one good example of the online activism actually can sort of do something even when the official media cannot do it.
Governments in China, they can't simply turn off the internet because Chinese businesses live by export and they need to talk to Western customers. Chinese universities live by getting information from Western universities by reading research papers, downloading lecture notes and so on, and they can't block that. They do want to block Falun Gong. They do want to block stuff related to the Dalai Lama. So it's hard. Ultimately, I think it's undoable. And all they're succeeding in doing is raising the bar for a little while. In the end, though, I believe that China, like everywhere else that develops, will become open and democratic like the West. There are all sorts of people who see the internet as a threat and who want to control it using whichever excuse will work in the politics of the day. Ultimately, I think this is vain because the world is just becoming so connected that in Western countries, there's nowhere you can put the censorship anymore. That networks are too dense, flows of information are too great, that censorship is basically a lost battle.
You can sit at your house and make change. And we're talking about social change and political change and economic change in a way that was never possible before. One of our Ning networks is the Congo Wall, which was created by Eve Ensler, who had just gotten back from the Congo with her V-Day organization, where women are being brutalized as a means of fighting a war. And the fact of the matter is they feel alone. And with social technology, women from all over the world could come to this Ning network and leave a message for the women of the Congo. You're not alone. And those messages, over 2,000 women and men around the world actually contributed a message. They printed them out and took them to the hospital in the Congo where women were recovering. No one is alone anymore. So it's up to people who use it to decide whether it is going to represent the best of human nature or the worst of human nature. And realistically, it's probably going to be a little bit of both. But what is possible today with social technologies is profound. So I actually think and really look at it as the skills people are learning across all of these facets of the world. It's not a surprise that they're using them for political activism. And I think that the part about it that is just amazing is the fact that it is global. I absolutely believe that the possibilities and the opportunities for people to live a rich, passionate life that allows them to express themselves in all the ways that they want to, regardless of where they live geographically. I don't think it gets any better than that.
While many try to limit people to avoid losing power, the internet provides each individual with a chance to have a voice that cannot easily be silenced. A lot of good can be done with this freedom, but how this voice is used is up to the people.